Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining our Government Industry Forum at the Data and AI Summit. I'm Michael Ortega from the Industry Marketing Team here at Databricks, and I'll be your host today. We have an amazing group of government leaders from some of the most respected agencies joining us here today to share their perspectives on how data, AI, and the Lakehouse architecture are enabling them to improve citizen services, better protect against threats, and deliver on their mission objectives. Without further ado, I'd like to hand it off to our first speaker today, Howard Levenson.
Welcome. My name is Howard Levenson. I'm the General Manager for Databricks Federal, and I'd like to welcome you all to the Public Sector Industry Forum. We're going to have a great set of chats today about accelerating AI initiatives in the government space, and the goal is achieving mission outcomes. So let's get right into it. So we've got a great panel today. There's actually there's a keynote and an expert panel. And I'm going to hand it off after this brief introduction to John Larson from Booz Allen. He's the Senior Vice President at Booz Allen in charge of analytics. And on his keynote, he'll introduce Deepali Powale, who's a data scientist with the Federal Bureau of Investigation, as well as Honorable Greg Little, who is the lead for the DoD Advana project. Following that, I'm going to host a panel with Dave Fuller from Veterans Affairs, Paul Donohoe from Center for Medicaid and Medicare Services, and Andrew Lucius from the Hennepin County, Minnesota. So let's get right to it, and let me give you a little bit of background about what we're going to talk about today. So we know that data and AI is a top White House priority. We've seen a whole bunch of legislation to kind of drive these points forward. We've got the IT Modernization Act, and the goal there is to move from legacy on-premise data centers into the cloud. We've got the federal data strategy. The responsibility there is to federate all the data and catalog all the data and govern all the data, govern all the data so that we can use data as a strategic asset. And finally, there's the AI executive order, and the goal there is to drive data and AI to making evidence-based decisions. It's not only that there's a lot of legislation, there's a lot of money behind this as well. Government last year spent $1 billion and will spend more than that in 2021 to accelerate data and AI research. When you talk to federal CIOs out there, like Gartner did, you'll find that the top priorities are none other than AI and ML, machine learning, data analytics and cloud. And the justification for all this investment and because of all of these priorities is tremendous outcomes for our government and for our citizens. In fact, Deloitte estimates this to be $41 billion in savings every year from data-driven automation. But there are challenges in moving forward with this process. First off, we've got a skills challenge. You know, it's hard these are new technologies and new capabilities. And frankly, the public sector is behind the industry average in terms of the number of data scientists and data analysts that they've got. So we've got to close the gap there. We've also got some gaps in the IT Modernization Act. You know, a couple of years ago, OPM did a study and they found there were 12,000 data centers across the federal government. So it's going to take us some time to migrate that data into the cloud, and it's hard to do that. If the data is all isolated in on-premise data centers, you can imagine how difficult it is to build a federal data strategy with all of these islands of data. And we all know that you can't use AI and ML until you've federated all of that data together and you've normalized all the data before you can actually start applying advanced analytics. So how do we resolve these challenges? Well, the approach that Databricks has is this Lakehouse pattern and this Lakehouse platforms. And so let me describe the problem a little bit more, and then we'll talk about how Lakehouse addresses it. But the challenge, again, is you've got all of these data sources that you see on the left. Many of these are operational data stores and relational databases that the federal government's had for decades. And the idea is we want to take all of this data and we want to federate it all together so that it's ready for analytics. So the goal is you take all of this data and you migrate it into the cloud. And the cloud offers this really low-cost, durable storage that's highly reliable. And you can put all of that data there at a very low cost. Once I've got the data there and I've normalized it, then I'd like to start doing analytics on it. And hopefully from those analytics, we'll be able to deliver better results. That may come in the form of better national security, in terms of reduced financial crimes, better social services, and many other capabilities that the government can benefit from better use of data. So let me show you how we do this with the Lakehouse platform. So first of all, Databricks started as a cloud platform. So we've always been native to the cloud. And the idea here is you take all of these operational data stores, and through tools like our Delta and our Delta live tables, you can take the data from those operational data stores. And as the data is changing, you can migrate that data into the cloud through a process called change data capture. And this is enabled in an automated process through Delta live tables and the underlying Delta file format. Once you've got that data in the cloud, now I've got it in a low-cost, highly durable cloud object storage, and I can normalize it. I can get the data to look the same and act the same, and now I can start to run analytics across all of that data. And it's the Databricks Delta file format and Delta engine that enable you to do this at scale. But we also offer a managed catalog that allows you to govern this data and track the data so that you know what data that you've got, and you can make it available to those people and those personas within your organization that are entitled to it. From there, you then build and train your machine learning models, or you can bring your SQL analyst directly on top of this data without having to first migrate that data into a data warehouse. So you've got this analytics capability that allows you to do everything from SQL analytics to machine learning and artificial intelligence, all built into the comprehensive system, ultimately providing you a BI machine learning without any limits. Now let's go through that in another step. So the Lakehouse architecture is really the best qualities of a data warehouse, which is the ability to deal with SQL analytics and with structured data, along with the best qualities of a data lake, which allow you to deal with all of these data types and allows you to use advanced analytics on the data and not just SQL. In the Databricks Lakehouse paradigm, we bring both of these together. And of course, we run on all three cloud service providers, Azure, AWS, and Google. All of the data then gets stored in the open data storage, which is our Delta Lake capability. And from there, you run our managed catalog to deliver the management, the governance, and the catalog so that you know what data you've got there. On top of all of this, we deliver a platform that's ideal for all the different personas that deal with data in your organization. Data engineers who are responsible for ingesting the data, transforming the data, and making it ready for analytics. BI and SQL analysts who want to be able to build standard reports on that data. Data scientists and machine learning engineers who want to be able to do predictions and determine anomalies from the data, and even real-time data applications that can take IoT data in and actually perform analytics on that data as it's flowing in. Now, all of this runs in the Databricks platform, making it a simple platform for all of your workloads. It's an open platform, so there's no vendor lock-in. Almost all of the capabilities that Databricks offers here, including Spark, including Delta, and MLflow, have been open sourced. And it's a collaborative environment with the ability to share information with role-based access control so that only the data that you want shared gets shared. Now, the other challenge that many of our federal clients have is that they want to run this in federally compliant environments. And you shouldn't worry about that. Databricks offers this capability for DoD clients, for intelligence community clients, and of course for civilian agency clients, as well as state, local, and education organizations. So we meet just about every criteria you could imagine, including FedRAMP for those civilian clients, FedRAMP High for even more civilian clients. We meet the DoD's IL5 and IL6 requirements. We even meet the intelligence community's requirements based on ICD 503. Now, you don't have to believe me on these things. We're happy to prove it. Pick a use case, bring some data, bring some of your subject matter expertise. We'll enable Databricks in the environment, and we'll bring some of our subject matter expertise. And very quickly, we can build some analysis and show you insights in your data that you've not seen before. And more importantly, we can show you the business value that you can get out of that data. So I hope you'll join me in the conversation. But at this point, I'd like to turn it over to John Larson from Booz Allen. As I mentioned, John's a colleague, a good friend, and the Senior Vice President for Analytics at Booz Allen. And he's got an interesting approach on building a standardized platform for doing big data analytics. Here, take it away, John.
Thank you, Howard, for that great introduction. I'm excited to have this opportunity to speak about some of the innovative things that we're doing in partnership with Databricks on behalf of our clients' most critical mission challenges. By way of brief introduction, my name's John Larson. I'm a Senior Vice President with Booz Allen, leading our AI and ML solutions for our civilian and commercial clients. Today, along with Deepali Powale, a data science lead and program manager with enterprise analytics at FBI, and Greg Little, deputy comptroller for enterprise data and business performance at the DoD, we will discuss the challenges and the solutions to achieving enterprise AI. As I mentioned in my intro, and if we could move to the next slide, I'm with Booz Allen, a leading provider of consulting services and technology services for the US federal government and Fortune 500 companies. We were founded in 1914, and today we're the largest provider of public sector AI services with 30% of the market share. We have over 27,000 employees and a critical mass of 500 plus seasoned AI and ML practitioners. And we're recognized on an array of awards, but I'd like to specifically highlight two: the 2019 Inform Prize for Innovation in Analytics and the 2020-21 CMS AI Health Outcomes Challenge, where we were part of the winning team. So we do know a thing about AI and how to do it successfully. With that, let's go to the next slide and talk a little bit about why is AI success so hard? We've heard all the stories, we've seen the headlines. Achieving AI in a lab where it's sterile, where the data is clean, where the processes are well controlled is actually relatively easy. It's when you scale this and the applications and bring them into the production environments with massive and messy data, expensive compute resources, and complex business processes that things get difficult. In fact, the vast majority of AI and ML projects will fail because of these challenges, and they will never move to production. With more than 300 concurrent analytics projects, we've learned that there's really 4 key elements to doing AI successfully in an enterprise. The first is cultural readiness. The second is data readiness. The third is technology readiness. And the fourth is process readiness. And today, along with the deep dives from Deepali and Greg, we're going to focus on the insights around achieving data and technology readiness and how we accomplish those through the Databricks platforms. So if we go to the next slide, we'll talk a little bit about the specifics of our extensive experience and what it's taught us as we've worked with our clients to address enterprise AI. And what we've seen is the standardization of operations around these 2 pillars of data and technology is critical. AI technology is simply too large, complex, and rapidly evolving to make it very cost-effective or difficult to stay up with in terms of all the possible permutations that you have to govern. So it's very critical that you think about those different solutions and how to integrate them together with the appropriate architecture. It's also difficult to obtain and scale talent. The skills required to bring these different tools and techniques together is very difficult to maintain and acquire. And that means that you've got to have robust AI solutions that have a consistent and standardized architecture to give you the best ability to scale your solutions. And finally, while I think everyone looks at all of their problems and believe that they are truly unique, the reality is that the foundational concepts remain the same throughout most AI applications. And so you have to find that consistent foundation and extend it so that you have the ability to create that scale more rapidly. And we found institutions really do increase their probability for AI success when they make it easy to apply and reuse these standards by defining common terminology to make the architecture easy to consume, regardless of the experience. And if you focus on democratizing AI and creating an inclusive community with seamless collaboration tools to unlock the potential and the creativity of the workforce, you also increase your success rate. And finally, if you drive constant learning by leveraging evolutionary and open architecture frameworks and embrace change, you increase your probability of success. So that's what's really driving the keys to success here. And if we move to the next slide, we'll talk a little bit about the crosswalk between what we developed in our reference architecture and what we saw in the Databricks platform. And from those lessons learned, we developed an overall reference architecture that looked at how do you leverage established providers and services rather than reinventing the wheel. This is an expensive space to play in, and it's generally better to integrate together best solutions from others than trying to build your own. We also found that everything is evolving rapidly. If you blink, you're going to miss something. And so you got to stay open architecture. You got to stick with the evolutionary open architecture approaches that embrace change rather than resist it and evolve with technology and client needs. We also found that you've got to create a suite of collaboration and productivity tools. Driving collaboration across data scientists, data engineers, AI and ML engineers requires notebooks and GitHub repositories integrated into the platforms you're using to ensure collaboration and achieve the scale that you need. And finally, we found that if you drive smart automation, constantly train and use partnerships to drive that scale, that's a much better architecture to hang from than if you don't adopt those types of techniques. And so those principles, right, as we looked at those, from those principles, we created this reference implementation within Databricks because of how closely their platform aligned with our reference architecture and what we were trying to do in that vision. And what we really enjoyed about Databricks was the lakehouse architecture, which enables reliable data centralized for analytics and AI workloads. There's also an incredible interoperability to support the scale and operationalize AI across a variety of use cases. This is how Databricks really enables integration with reusable ML pipelines to minimize variation and complexity and costs, how they give end users the control and choice over applications of UX and UI layers so that you don't have to do rework because it's already built in, and how they enable collaboration power with notebooks, CI/CD, and GitHub. We also appreciate the automation. I think it can't be understated how important it is to have auto scaling, auto termination, and performance optimization built in. These are significant cost savings. And we found tremendous value in the lifecycle machine learning governance and tracking, and how it offers configuration management of data features and models. And it decouples the machine learning software baselines to deploy models faster, more frequently, and independent from software to enhance model performance and adoption. And finally, I think the other thing I will just emphasize is back to this notion of speed. The wonderful thing about the integration of these solutions is that it achieves speeds 2 to 10 times faster in terms of its optimization around Spark to significantly reduce CSP cloud saving costs so that you can enjoy higher savings. And so that's why we looked at the Databricks platform and said our reference architecture needed to be developed and deployed within this framework. And we developed this reference implementation with that in mind. So with that sort of overview, what I'd like to do is I'd like to turn it over and say, let's have a deep dive with Deepali around some of the things that she and her team have been working on. And then from there, we'll have a conversation with Greg about some of the applications that they've been deploying. So with that, let me turn it over to Deepali.
Hey, John, thank you so much for the introduction and the good overview. I think I'm going to touch on some of the points that you have already kind of covered and how we are leveraging in our data pipelines. So I'll talk about our project Prometheus. It's our content warehouse where we have leveraged Databricks in many of its components and data ingest pipelines. We started with data ingest. I'll talk about that. Next about our enrichments, later about analytics and the sandbox environment. How we leverage the collaboration with our mission users and the enterprise. We'll be seeing some of the use cases about that. So as you all know, our data ingest and data is very complex. Our data pipelines have to cover a lot of a diverse nature of the data, along with apply the security policies and compliance. We have a user-based, user attribute-based security, along with law enforcement policy-based security. So this makes a security model very complex to apply than the standard data processing pipelines. So most of our solutions was based on NoSQL database, most specifically, which allows us to do cell-level security. Since we onboarded Databricks in 2019 Q4, we have simplified our data pipelines, our ingest pipelines, where we have the reliance on NoSQL. We have minimized our reliance on our NoSQL solutions and broke it down into what has enforced is a data lake house now, but before we started with a Delta Lake kind of implementation. This has significantly improved the performance for us. It has many of the siloed components were no more needed. We have also delivered the Delta Lake formatted output, which is now applied to many of our downstream tasks. As you all know, the Delta Lake also provides us an asset compliance and the revisions and the history, which helps us to leverage some of the complex ingest pipeline related stuff. So for example, if data needs to be re-ingested due to the policy or due to any other changes in the data, we could get the latest and greatest revision in the analytics pipeline. So this kind of easy use of the data was not possible before. Another use case is how do we purge data when there's some kind of policy changes? That purging in the one side of the pipeline should not affect the other side of the pipeline. So using the revisions, making sure that the data is compliant from end to end was of a great use that we have seen. Today, we are using data lake, data ingested data from the raw data that comes from our providers. And we are now able to leverage it in our Delta Lake pipelines. Thus helping us to kind of build that end-to-end discovery and end-to-end understanding of how this data can be leveraged using a Delta Lake house. Now, next thing what I would say is that because of the simplification of this end-to-end pipelines has helped us to focus more on the data discovery, building an APIs to discover this data. So it has freed up a lot of our time with our data engineers. From the analytics side of the house, we were the early adopters of Spark. So moving to Databricks was no-brainer. We were able to convert all of our analytics pipeline into Databricks in almost a week's time. We were able to find the performance improvements. The jobs that were taking many hours were now finishing in minutes. That definitely got attention of many people. We were able to kind of build a data analytics pipeline given in the same format, which is a Delta Lake format from our ingest. So we don't have our simplification of a data ingest or data analytics ingest pipeline was very helpful here. We could focus on enrichments, building data sensing techniques, feature engineering, rather than making sure that the data is compliant, making sure we are not breaking any policies. And those kind of stuff happened because of the Databricks ingest pipeline. Other part I would say is that Spark and using Spark for building our AI ML use cases, especially the machine learning use cases, building our own algorithms was very helpful. Applying mathematics, complex mathematics is required for some of our use cases. Having the processing done in memory in a distributed environment, we were able to get the SLAs that we are required for our downstream task. The other recent use case that I can say is that since 2019, because of the simplification of the pipeline, we were able to release a big analytic that leverages data mining techniques, record deduplications, graph analytics to the enterprise. And that has been a very successfully, I would say, visualized, understood by our end users, our enterprise users, and we were able to create the APIs that can be integrated in our sandbox solutions, which I'll talk a little bit shortly. Another part that we have also done, the most recent work, is building AI proof of concepts. As John was just talking about, sort of like building that AI frameworks or AI philosophy, it requires some sort of an adaptation, requires a baselining, some of the work that is required to prove out whether this AI concept is going to work for you or not. What we have done here is our AI piece was mostly doing an extractive summarizations that draw insights from our analytics. So here we were able to use the Databricks end to end. What I mean by that, we were able to pull the data from our data ops pipeline, which was not complete, but which was done just about to use for an analytics. We pulled the data from there, enriched it, built useful analytics, applying complex mathematics on it, and then delivered the analytics, which was visualized using open source libraries and built an extractive summarization component of it. So all this was done using Databricks. Visualizations were also well received by our UX team. We have to demo this to our executives. And one of the things when this project was kicked off, I told my team that we are not going to use PowerPoints. We are going to use this delivery end-to-end using Databricks. And let's see what are the other things that we fall short. Luckily, we didn't have to use any PowerPoints. So that was one big, huge benefit. But the idea behind not using the PowerPoint was that to explain the dynamics of the mathematical models that are being constructed. Can we effectively do that explanation? Can we show the different steps that goes in to build that models? Can we add in the explainability over there? So some of those were the considerations for us when we were building this proof of concept. And I don't think anybody was saying anybody that was missing any of the PowerPoints. So it was very successful in my opinion. Also, the same analytics visualization is now been kind of given to our UX people who can actually use it to build it in our enterprise UIs. Next, I'm going to talk to you about our sandbox. Now that we have this data at an enterprise scale and an enterprise level, which is kind of stored in our data lakes and content warehouse, we wanted the users to start using this, not just the enterprise users who are technically savvy, but the users from the field who have a multitude of experience, of knowledge of how to use the data. They might have done some Python development. They are SQL experts, but they are also citizen data scientists who we want this data to be exposed to. So we were looking for an environment which was easy to access at the enterprise scale. They should be able to access the data that they have access to. So there has to be a security-based model. They should be able to search only what they can see. They can check out this data and also bring in their own data to kind of pull this information together and build the analytics that is of interest to them. At the same time, we wanted to expose all these analytical APIs that we were developing, the analytical, the enrichments that are being available to them through these REST APIs that can be incorporated in their work. So we were looking for a platform, and Databricks fit that bill. At the same time, we wanted to reduce the cost. We wanted to make sure the compute resources are not overly used. There's a proper governance on it. At the same time, we wanted to make sure that our clusters are shut down at a specified time. And people no-wise users should be able to feel comfortable using an environment. And that's why Databricks was one of the environment that we chose for this sandbox. Now, another thing we were also looking for was the self-paced training. Databricks provided us some self-paced training. They should also provided us the RSAs where they can work with our sandbox users can work with these RSAs, feel comfortable to ask them a question, and kind of really literally leverage some of the enhanced capabilities of Databricks in their use cases. Another thing I would say is that what is very working in this environment is a collaborative nature. People should be able to share the notebooks, should be able to do the demos, should be able to kind of download the data of the insights that they're building in these notebooks, and kind of use it for their reporting or their work that they do for the mission. What we have seen is that the users have not only leveraged all these different features, they came up with the use cases, many different use cases that as an enterprise analytics, we have not even thought about, and really solve them using some of the analytics API that they have access to, some enrichments that they have built, and really literally taken it to the next level for them to solve their mission use cases. Later, we also have noticed that the users were also, not just this, we started with I would say about dozens of users. Later, we got some more requests, more use cases to solve. Finally, we would have to say, like, because of the nature of this delivery, we have to kind of open it in a later, kind of have a time box this user onboarding. And what we have noticed is that people's enthusiasm to use such sandbox environment was amazing. I would like to talk about how we can leverage this features or this kind of collaboration with the enterprise users who has a multitude of different skill set with an analytics, or especially AI ML workloads. Many of the insights that are drawn by these users can be combined to apply to an enterprise services, where users should feel very comfortable to input, or rather to provide their inputs and have their say. So something when we build any of the analytics using an agile processing, a story point that is, or the story which says that, hey, go and build this analytics and then has a completion criteria. We have to go beyond that. We have to go think about at least 4 to 5 different steps ahead. And these users are going to help us to do that, rather than having a third step for us, a third model that will help them use this use case. We wanted to early on capture that requirements. So I see this as a collaboration from all different types of users, all different skill sets, people who are citizen data scientists, but people who are also skilled data scientists. Many of our AI ML experts can also work together on this. And this end-to-end pipeline where you are focusing on analytics, then rather than thinking about how to manage the data, is a huge help and huge, I would say, a step ahead for us. This is how we leverage Databricks. Back to you, John.
Yeah, thank you, Deepali, and what a great set of use cases. And thank you for sharing that. It's really exciting to hear you talk about sort of the promise. I feel like when you and I were talking earlier, at time immemorial, it's always been this data challenge. You know, you spend all your time on data, and hearing you talk about, like, we're realizing the ability to spend more time modeling, feature engineering, tuning, like, that's exciting that you aren't just trying to figure out and spend all your time in the data, right? And then I love the other example around this citizen data scientists in these sandboxes and distributing this sort of capability and leveraging across all these, let's use the term sort of nodes, your sort of distribution center, if you will, through these collaboration tools and driving greater insights. It's really exciting to hear that come to fruition and see the type of power tools like this can unlock for us. So thank you again for sharing that. With that, let's pivot. Let's come over and talk with Greg a little bit, who's going to talk about the Advana platform and some of the things we're doing around the application of this technology stack in the DoD environment. So Greg?
Yeah, John, thank you for the invite to discuss DoD's data journey. And Deepali, I thought your presentation was incredible. And what it did is it really highlighted an organization that's really mature in their data space and can actually use AI and ML. Well, I'll talk a little bit about AI and ML. A lot of our journey is still around the data and getting the data right. And I think we all know that if we don't get the data right, using tools like AI and ML are almost impossible. And in DoD, we really view data as another weapon in our arsenal to compete and provide strategic advantage. And as my friend Dave Spurk, who's an incredible colleague in the DoD CDO, likes to say, data is the new ammunition in our arsenal that improves decision-making and connects the DoD's boardroom and battle space. And I know that we don't have that much time today, so I want to quickly share our story around how the financial statement audit fundamentally changed how we think about data in the DoD, which when you think about it, it'll actually make a lot of sense. But compliance was sort of our entry point into the data space and the analytics space. And part of that was the creation of Advana, which is a program that I own, which is DoD's Enterprise Unified Data Management and Analytics Environment, which is made up of a collection of open source and cost technologies. And then I want to highlight some of the struggles that John talked about today and share some of the successes that we've seen within DoD, especially around using data analytics to improve DoD's mission performance. So I currently work in DoD's financial management community, and this idea of using data for better decision-making is not new. If you actually look back at the CFO Act of 1990, the whole intent of that act is to have better data to run a better government. And so just to give a sense of how long ago that was, I looked up last night that in 1990, the #1 song was Ice Ice Baby by Vanilla Ice, and the #1 movie was Home Alone. So if any of you want to feel really old, look up a picture of what Macaulay Culkin looks like today, and you'll feel extremely old. So knowing how long ago we've thought about using data analytics to improve decision-making, the question always comes up is, what's different this time? Because I think there's a heavy amount of skepticism within the community around how we're going to actually realize this vision of using data and analytics and AI and ML to improve performance outcomes. And I think there are really 4 major differences of why I have hope for DoD. The first is leadership. And we're really lucky to have had a good leadership in Deputy Secretary Norquist and really incredible leadership in Deputy Secretary Hicks in this data space. She just signed out a memo called the Data Advantage Memo. And in essence, that memo really elevates the role of data in our governance and how we're going to run the Department of Defense. But not only is she issuing policy, Secretary Hicks is actually walking the walk. And we actually held a performance review using Advana, our enterprise data management and analytics environment, looking at the health of our financials, the health of acquisition, supply chain, operational readiness. And we did this with live data and no PowerPoint, which is a small miracle within DoD for sure. The second area that I think is really different this time is around technology. Now, I always have a cautionary tale here because I think oftentimes we confuse our data strategy with a technology strategy. And don't get me wrong, technology is an important part of realizing the power of data to improve outcomes, but technology is just a tool. And there's really an ecosystem that goes around technology to be able to make sure we're using it in the appropriate way to actually get to the outcomes that we're looking for. Now, with that said, there are three major technology shifts that have really accelerated our data journey. The first is the cloud. The scale, flexibility, security, and the price of the cloud has brought speed and scale that was not possible even 5 years ago. So, for example, at the rate and velocity and volume of growth that we were seeing within Advana, in order to plan compute and storage out on premise would take me months. And now I can scale up and down within minutes. The second is that the tools for data engineering, data science, and data visualization have become easier and easier to use. And this has really allowed our business analysts with little to no coding skills get insights from data with ease. And so technology has really allowed me to tap into an additional pool of resources that probably weren't possible 5 years ago. And that's something that we could really use help with our vendors, is to be able to make these tools easier and easier to use. The third is schemaless technologies. And Deepali mentioned the NoSQL databases. Before, when I first started out in this space, we had to spend a lot of time on ETL. We had to spend a lot of time on getting our source systems to provide standard schemas. And with new technologies today, we've been able to sort of take in any format, any schema, and ingest that. And that's really saved, in my opinion, years in us being able to get access to data to not only be descriptive, but to also be predictive in how we're thinking of data. And so in my mind, the bottom line is that technology improves speed, and speed really matters when you're supporting a mission like DoD's. Now, the third thing that I think is different this time for us in DoD is the audit. And I sort of mentioned earlier how the audit has actually become a surprising story and an accelerator for us in our data and analytics journey. And the reason why is that the financial statement audit has been one of the best data management forcing functions in DoD for having an enterprise cross-functional and organizational data management and analytics environment. My first requirement when I started Advana, which has become that enterprise analytics environment, was to deploy what auditors call a universe of transactions. And really, a universe of transactions is simply to show the auditors we can reconcile all our business transactions like contracts, invoices, inventory, property, personnel to our financial statements. Now, while our financial statements are not particularly useful for DoD, that transactional level business data is. And also the principles of audit are the same for good data management. We want accurate, authoritative, complete, and timely data. In addition, the audit broke through some of the cultural barriers of data fiefdoms. When you're a large organizational bureaucracy like DoD, you need to really look for institutional levers that can break through cultural and organizational resistance. And sometimes compliance is the best way to start an initiative like this. So for example, the audit occurs every year, it'll never go away, and everyone has to participate. And there's really a non-controversial value add proposition. People can either give me all of their data, and I can work with the auditors, or they can have the 400 auditors show up at their doorstep. And for most of the DoD community, they'd rather have me deal with the auditors and give me the data, which opens up a lot of interesting analytics for us to be able to get to those outcomes that we're looking for. In the fourth area that I think is really different this time is that oftentimes people like me in DoD will stand up from the ivory tower and talk about theory around data and how we're going to improve performance. But what's cool about over the last couple of years is that we're actually doing things in this space. As I mentioned, Advana is an enterprise data management and analytics platform. We have about 18,000 users. We ingest data from over 250 data sources. We have about 25 billion transactions, and we grow almost 500 million transactions a month. By having and starting out with the audit and having all this cross-functional and cross-organizational data, we were actually able to respond to the COVID-19 crisis by building a COVID-19 common operating picture for DoD in less than 3 weeks. And this common operating picture was looking at bed utilization. We were running models to be able to predict risk where we had to move certain PPE, like ventilators. And we've been using it to look at our vaccine distribution metrics and determining where we should move vaccines to our higher risk populations. And so I'm really proud of what we've been able to do there with data using some pretty cool analytics techniques. We also are working with a lot of our senior advisors in the department on some really important strategic initiatives like diversity and inclusion and climate change. We've been able to bring in all the weather data, so hurricanes, fire, flooding, map that to our installations to look where we might have operational vulnerabilities due to climate change. We've actually used analytics in decision-making meetings. As I mentioned earlier, the Deputy Secretary, Secretary Hicks, is actually using Advana in her decision meetings, in our business health metric reviews, using live data and no PowerPoint to help run the Department of Defense, which is really a $3 trillion in asset enterprise. And we started to move not just looking at descriptive statistics, but understanding what happens when we can start using AI and ML. So we actually have our acquisition sustainment partners looking at our major weapon system programs like the Apache and the Black Hawk, and actually using ML and AI to predict the health of those programs 60, 90, 120 days out, which is pretty amazing to think about, so we can forward plan and find areas of risk before they even happen. The other thing that people might not know about, where we've started using some different analytics and AI ML techniques, is that the federal government actually has expiration dates on its funding. So some money you can only use for 1 year, some money you can only use for 2 years. And so before that money goes back to the Treasury, we want to make sure that we use it so we're maximizing our better buying power. We've been actually able to use some interesting algorithms looking at certain dormancy of our transactions, being able to rank by dollar amount and other factors, and have actually been able to repurpose almost $4 billion to high priority items. The last one I want to just share real quick in terms of, I think, a real success story, and the financial area is really robust in terms of AI and ML and pretty mature, is that we've been actually able to suck in all of our payment data for the department, all the payments before they actually occur, and run some interesting algorithms that have actually been able to prevent almost $1 billion in improper payments. And so what's been really cool over the last 2 years is that we're making this a real reality. Now, with some of these successes, I don't want to give the impression that we're not just starting out. I mean, we have a long way to go to really get to the nirvana state of using data in every meeting at the strategic level and the operational level to help improve performance and run the department. But we know that data is the key to success in this digital age. And like many of you, we in the DoD are still struggling to redefine our strategies around data. And for me, and John talked about this, the battle, or at least the discussion, has centered around two approaches. One is tearing down data silos, and then the second is creating a data-driven culture. And I think we've really struggled on both of these fronts. Strategically, the data silo accessibility struggle has somewhat missed the point, in my opinion. Yes, that data that is locked in one application or database inaccessible to other users is a problem, but the key to innovation for us is really when we can bring data together from multiple different functional areas, like acquisition and tie it to financial management and tie it to IT or tie it to readiness. And I think one of the things that we have done wrong in DoD is that in order to do that and unlock this data, we try to make everyone be standard. And I just don't think that's possible or needed in the technology space. I actually think it'll hurt DoD, because the database and structures that those source systems reside in today are done in a very purposeful way for that particular use case. And so we really need to be leveraging technology and a new way of thinking to be able to tap into those source systems, to be able to take the schema as it is, and then to be able to bring it into a platform like Advana and use technology that allows us to connect those functional dots and not be encumbered by that primary data source or the primary organization of responsibility. So it's really freeing up data, and having an open data architecture is something that we're really working on in DoD. Probably the biggest challenge that we see that John also mentioned was culture. In my mind, a data-driven culture is one in which data is used to inform every decision, in which every action is a strategic choice using the best available insight. And the tools that provide insight lead to the tools such as orchestration and automation that drive swift and effective action. And you can't use data to drive every action until you give every decision maker hands-on access to data and the tools to act on it. And so as I tell my team, it's not really a chicken and egg question in my mind. The business questions and the data must become before adoption. And we've been working really closely with our functional areas like IT, financial management, acquisition, to get the right questions, the right data, and then use the right tools to answer them. And so let me wrap up with this. I believe this combination of an organization-wide platform like Advana and a culture that embraces it is how DoD will compete in this ever-changing world environment. We need to guide the evolution of technology and culture in parallel so that we can use data across our organization to discover new insights that guide DoD strategy, ignite innovation, and really redefine how we achieve success. And so with that, John, I really appreciate the opportunity, and I'll turn it back over to you.
Great. Yeah. Thank you, Greg. Really good insights. And I think you see this sort of the nexus between these two use cases. I heard a commonality around the speed to insight from data, the complexity of overcoming those data challenges, and how you can use this technology to accelerate that. I also think that, you said something that was very consistent with some of the insights, Deepali, that you raised, which is this idea of how do we abstract out and step back from all the technology and allow sort of a broader consumption of citizen data scientists, business analysts to be able to use low code, no code, or other types of tools and techniques more easily without having to understand all the back end and create and drive insights. And I think the last thing I think you said that was really compelling was I think both of you are envisioning a world in which PowerPoint is not the primary format of data consumption and insight, which is, I think, something we can all align around, is the idea of how do we become data driven and how do we look at more dynamic insights as we sit in meetings and drive insights and actions from that data so that we're making data-driven decisions. I think, Greg, you talked about the data acts of the past. I'm thinking about the Evidence-Based Policy Act and its importance and the role of making data help inform every one of our policy decisions. So really great conversation, thoroughly enjoyed it. Thank you both so much for the time and for your commitment and leadership in driving data and analytic insights for our government and for the success of our nation. So thank you very much. And thank you, Databricks, on behalf of Booz Allen for allowing us this opportunity to talk today. Thank you.
Thank you, John, Deepali, and Greg, for sharing how you're driving innovation at the DoD and FBI, powered by data, AI, and Databricks. I'd like to now hand it back to Howard and our esteemed group of panelists for today's government panel discussion. Take it away.
Well, hello, my name's Howard Levenson, and I'm the General Manager for Databricks Federal, and I'm really excited to host this government panel today. Today on the panel, we've got Dave Fuller, Chief of the Data Analytics Division of the U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs. We have Andrew Lucius, who is the Principal Data Scientist from Hennepin County, and Mr. Paul Donohoe, who's a Senior Technical Advisor in the Enterprise Database Group at Center for Medicaid and Medicare Services. So why don't we get started just by a brief introduction. Dave, maybe you could start off, give us a little bit more about yourself, where you come from, and what's going on at the VA right now.
Great. So I have the distinct honor and privilege of serving our U.S. military veterans and their families through supporting the Department of Veteran Affairs program and operational decision-making. My chain of command includes the Office of Management and the Financial Services Center. So I oversee data analytics products and share the responsibility of architecting our DevOps pipeline and migrating to the cloud.
And Dave, how long have you been doing that for?
3 years.
3 years, very nice. Okay, let's move on to Andrew. Andrew, give us a little bit of background and the role in your organization and what you're doing with data and AI.
Sure. So I've been with Hennepin County for 5 years. I'm a principal data scientist, as Howard said. And my job is, at least currently, split between 3 areas. So I work in part in the county attorney's office, in part for public safety administration, which sits sort of above the county attorney's office and all the aspects of public safety. And then I'm also on the COVID data team right now, which is sort of a temporary emergency team to help with all of that data.
Dave, I'm sure you're getting 3 times the pay these days for
Not quite, but.
And over to you, Paul. I know you've been doing this more than 3 years. Give us a little bit of background on the work that you're doing at Center for Medicaid and Medicare Services and who Paul Donohoe is.
More than 3 decades, actually, Howard. I've been 35 years, almost all in big, large systems with data. So I've been following the data, evolution as an industry for quite some time. So been at CMS for 22 years. Most recently, I was with the Marketplace, helped work that system there with the Affordable Care Act. Recently, I'm working out of the Office of Information Technology as a data strategist. We're trying to figure out, what comes next now that there's a new generation of tools and methods out there. So we're trying to figure out what's next.
I love talking to you, Paul, because you're more than just a data scientist, data analyst. You're like a data historian, and you can tell us how CMS has evolved over the decades and why we are where we are today as a result of what's happened in the past. So I always find that fascinating. Hey,
you got to know where you're coming from to know where you're going, Howard.
It's so true, man. Maybe you can expand upon that since you got the microphone. Tell us about kind of like the analytics journey at Center for Medicaid and Medicare Services, kind of where it started from. And then maybe if you could also share how it's better or different from some of the other federal agencies that you've interfaced with.
Well, first of all, I love the mission of CMS. It's just, it's a great place to work. It brings a lot of talent, So anyhow, it's a really great organization. So if you're out there, you're looking for a job, CMS is a great place. It handles a tremendous amount of data. We impact 1/7 of the United States economy, and so that's big. So it's not just health security; it's financial security for the nation as well. So, but you've got just look at the programs: children's health, Medicare, Medicaid, the Marketplace. Each of those systems have tons of data. I saw it through where we had mainframes and tapes and just mountains and mountains of data. And now we have many more sources, but, we're moving to the cloud. And I guess the big thing for me is, I was there when we went from hierarchical to relational, from mainframe to the mid-tier. But the biggest change I've seen in my career has been the separation of compute and storage. Now, I know that gets a little bit squirrely to think about, but in the old days, you had to have the compute, the memory, and the storage all sort of tuned up. And I couldn't let you, if I'm on a project, I couldn't let you, if you were on another project, on my system to share my data, because you might have a runaway query and that would mess up my ability to pull off my service level as a project manager. Well, when you get to the cloud, and then, that's how we've learned of each other, Howard, is the Spark is the first, many tools come out today that do similar things, but Spark was that first, miracle came out of Berkeley that separates compute and storage, where I could have the data sitting over here and many different teams tapping into it, neither knowing that the other's there and they're not degrading one another. And boy, that's a big thought. And it's going to take us a generation to figure out how that all really comes to play. But I've got some ideas on that, but we'll let some of that go for a little bit later in the discussion here, Howard. But I think that's the big ticket, is the separation of compute and storage. What does that open up in the cloud in particular with the ephemeral compute. It's just a brand new ballgame, and it's very exciting. It's a very, very cool thing. But anyway.
And I got to hand it to you, Paul, because you recognize that differentiation before most people in the industry did, and kind of seized upon it at Center for Medicaid and Medicare Services. So we're going to come back to that because I think that's an important theme. But just moving along, Andrew Lucius, maybe you could tell us about the analytics journey at Hennepin County. And I'm particularly interested maybe in, if you know, since it's so relevant, what's happened with the COVID use case that you referenced earlier?
Sure, yeah. They're sort of parallel stories, I suppose. So with COVID data, you know, it just hit everybody, you know, like a train. All of a sudden, we had to get a bunch of stuff together very quickly. For us at the county level, you know, we needed to run isolation and quarantine sites for the homeless population, get those up and running very quickly. We needed to get surveillance tracking going very quickly. We have a public health department within our county. And so the chief data officer just pulled in a couple people because he was getting, you know, that pressure from above to get reports together. And we're R people. And so we just set up a ton of R scripts basically that ran locally on our machines off OneDrive, pulling, you know, because everybody's scrambling. So there's a lot of Excel sheets flying around. And we were just pulling things together, putting out Power BI reports, trying to track everything that was going on, trying to clean everything in R. And it had us going, you know, 7 days, right? So every day we'd have to do something manually on our machines. And things would break constantly because you have the spreadsheets. And so Databricks came in for us as an automation tool, essentially. So we really didn't need the big data aspect of it. I know that's usually what you hear about with Spark, but the nice thing about Databricks is you also have that single node cluster option. And you also have, you know, Python and R preloaded on there. And most of the packages you'd need to do basic data cleaning, stuff like that. And so it was really nice for us. We could just move our spreadsheets to the lake with a logic app. And then we could automate what we were doing with the COVID data cleaning in Databricks on single node clusters, and gave us our weekends back essentially. So yeah, and as an organization, we're still thinking through what we're going to do with sort of enterprise data warehousing strategies. But within public safety, the project I'm on sort of got that ball rolling earlier. We're trying to get all the data from all the public safety agencies that impact Hennepin County, that interface with it, so inside and outside, sort of into one place. You know, and a lake is obviously ideal for that.
Whew, that's a really key point that I'd like to come back to as well. You know, I just was reading the DoD has their own data strategy, and you know, really paramount to that is data is a resource. And it's got to be federated, and in order for them to really get value out of it. So we'll come back to that and talk a little bit more about you know, all these different islands of data and how you pull them together. Hey, Dave, tell us about the analytics journey at the VA. You guys certainly have tons of data, and I know that at the beginning when we got started with you guys, you were largely on premise. Tell us a little bit about your journey.
Right. Right. So that began about 7 years ago. We had just a few resources, you know, a small contract and big ideas on how to support the regional CFOs across the VA. We picked up some of the customers that manage the healthcare supply chain along the way. But since those early days, so much has changed. Now we have grown our federal staff, increased the size of the contract, expanded our customer base, and even continue to have big ideas on how we could support the VA leadership. We want to make sure that they have some kind of efficiency to accomplish their mission of serving our veterans, right? So
has the quantity of data grown considerably?
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah. But before I get to that, you know, our organization, you know, you asked how we're different. We're a franchise fund, and that means we're not funded like, you know, the typical government organization. Instead, we operate more like a business. We're funded by the agreements that we make with other organizations across the VA, or in fact, with any other federal agency. So we have to pay real close attention to our, you know, our revenue and our expenses. But we're pretty decent at that because we're also providing financial services dashboards across the VA. And you talk about large data. One of our use cases that we'll talk about is providing an enterprise solution that's aptly named the CFO dashboard. The data source for this is the financial management system that contains the financial general ledger for the VA. And that's significant because the size of the VA budget is only second to the Department of Defense, right?
Wow.
So the CFO dashboard, it basically provides summary and detailed drill down capabilities with various visuals to understand the status of obligations, accounts receivables, advances. And we even added, you were talking about COVID-19, we added COVID-19 spending tab to accommodate that current focus that we have.
That's pretty cool. That's really cool. I know you guys have a massive amount of data, and I know that pulling together that CFO dashboard, I think at one point took days of ETL work, and I think you've really modernized that and gotten it down to maybe even hours.
Absolutely, yeah. That was one of the challenges that we had with the CFO dashboard. I mean, it took 5 days to move or ETL the data from the FMS source to our landing servers, and then displaying the details for the end users, because our end users wanted a lot of details on a single sheet. That would either time out or it would take way too much time for it to be useful for our end users' experience.
That's really, really cool. What is the goal at the VA? I'm going to kind of move on to the next part of this, which is what do you hope to do in terms of improving the lives of veterans or improving the way the VA operates through data?
Well, for us, since we are a financial services center, the value that we're providing is giving financial decision makers good analytics with, like I said, with CFO dashboard, with supply chain dashboards, even when we have denials with claims, understanding why, and even getting to the point where we could be predictive and go out and find out how we could stop those denials, or at least change and modify the processes so that those denials don't occur as frequently. So for us, it's mostly making sure that the VA operates efficiently so the money could be used well for supplying services to our veterans.
Seems pretty obvious, and hopefully there's efficiencies that can be brought there, and better benefits for veterans. That's what we're all about. Hey, Andrew, maybe you could talk. I know we had a pre-call, and you told me a whole bunch of things about how data and analytics have improved the lives of citizens in Hennepin County. Maybe you could share some of those stories here.
Sure, yeah. So I think sort of the first way is, Power BI was just adopted a few years ago by our organization. It's really taken off. And one of the things that's enabled us to do, at least more easily, is to be much more transparent. So we have a number of public dashboards now that we share via Power BI. So we're just giving the residents of Hennepin County a sort of a full view of, okay, what's going on. For example, I own the one for the county attorney's office, right? So what does that 5-year look back look like for our caseloads? What types of cases did we get? What was our conviction rate? All of that stuff we're putting out publicly for people to see, to break down by geographic area, including also the racial demographics, the gender demographics, so people can see, okay, what sort of disparities are we looking at here? And of course, when you do that, along with that comes pressure to say, well, what are you doing about those disparities? And that's something we're doing as well. We're building, we have a disparities line of business, we call it. So we're really focusing across the board on how do we reduce these disparities? Now that we've been transparent about what they are, where they are, how do we set up programs that target them to reduce them across all of our businesses?
And I think it's important to note that Hennepin County is the county that contains Minneapolis.
Yeah.
And you guys were recently in the news as a result of the George Floyd case. So there's a lot of racial concerns and requests for parity there.
Yes, it is a very tense time. That was our building on the news every day for a while. So yeah, there's a lot of pressure, and rightfully so, to do more in that area.
And I think it's a great service that you guys are providing, that transparency and visibility so that people can see where the injustices are and we can resolve them.
Yeah. And just one more example, if I may. So another project we've been working on is, so as a county, we fund ourselves in part through property taxes, and people go delinquent on those every year, a certain subset of the population, and a certain subset of those delinquencies, stay persistently delinquent and go all the way to forfeiture, where the county repossesses the property and then sells it off to deal with the debt. And we've been using machine learning now to try to predict which of those initial delinquencies that pop up are most likely to make it all the way to forfeiture, so that we can then intervene in the process earlier to get those people services, help them out with paying their back taxes, things like that. And that's also a disparities project, because as you may have guessed, that disproportionately impacts poorer people and people of color in our county. So it's another example.
Awesome. And it's great to see, tax dollars going to use where we get transparency and that visibility, and the county's actually doing things to help the lives of, those who are less fortunate. So kudos to you guys. Hey, Paul, tell us about this at CMS. CMS affects everybody in the country at some level, I would think. How's CMS using data to improve the lives of citizens?
Well, there's a lot of examples. The fire standard, there's a lot of work going on there, which is about the interoperability of data sets across the country, including that comes from CMS. But I guess the focus that I have is, you really have got to do the best job you can in firming up the, I'll throw a little Chauncey Gardner at you from Peter Sellers' movie, Being There. But you got to have a strong trunk, and the tree limbs have to be strong, in order to have the fruit of machine learning and artificial intelligence and some of the other things. So what I'm getting at is, what are some new ways that we can provide more complete, timely, and synchronized data, and the data would be better defined and cataloged. In other words, you can bring all the data scientists in and the like, or even supporting a good example would be supporting our constituents, whether they're the doctors and the institutions or the beneficiaries and the recipients. Part of that is, if I could have all of the information about a claim at the fingertips of the customer service rep, or at the, David was talking a little bit about the financials. If we're talking about a dispute we may have on a payment side, having all that information available, whether it's a marketplace enrollment or a Medicare claim, it just is going to help reduce the burden. Another big thing that we're trying to do at CMS is reduce the burden on the entire system. That our job is to see how we can, get the doctors and consumers in a better state where they're not overburdened by too much regulation, or just, in my perspective, what I work on, just not well organized data. So I think one of our great challenges is, how do you better organize yourself with the tools that we have? And I'm very interested in a concept that we had a little group that went off about 5 years ago at CMS, and we looked at how the cloud might impact us and what we do at CMS. And we thought that, organizing, how do you organize yourself to really get that data complete, timely, and synchronized? And one of the ideas would be is that, you can't tackle it at the enterprise, it's too big. If you're going after the project level, it's too small. So really the data domain seems to be a really Goldilocks kind of, whether it's Medicare claims or provider, Benny, those are the kind of domains that if you could organize with what we'll call collective data stewardship. This is a concept that we're starting to define a little bit amongst ourselves, where the teams that create the data are the teams that place the data in an open format. They register that data then in the data catalog, and then that catalog has because our data lake that we're thinking about, that we're building out at CMS, is a little bit different than what industry has defined it. Ours is more of a metadata essence that also has access control wrapped around it. So, but what that does, because our programs are so diverse and the expertise lay at many of our decentralized organizational units, that they know our data best. And so if we can get the teams that know the data best to define it in a standard data dictionary, to then catalog that or place that into a catalog, and only our best data. We only want the best data in that catalog, at least to begin with, right? So that's how, at some point, you've got to sort of figure out, like, you know, what is the level of granularity you're going to organize yourself at? We say we think it's the data domain. Okay, then what do you got to do? It's just simple stuff. The data that the team that creates the data defines it, places it in a dictionary, serves that up into a catalog, and then access control on that. And I guess that then gets to, at some point, you know, I'd like to talk a little bit about Delta Lake and some of the enabling technologies behind the scenes. I know you rewrote your kernel. I think you're calling it Photon. Because at some point, how do you scale that? You got massive amounts of data, and different teams are hitting the same sort of S3 node. Say if you go with Amazon, you know, is a tool like Databricks going to be able to handle the throughput and some of the metadata cataloging that you all do? So those are some of the things that we're exploring. You know,
those are.
At the end of the day, though, it's about better data. I think that's how you serve the public. More complete, timely, synchronized data.
You just summarized it incredibly well, and I was going to try to do that, but it's about better data for better decision making, right? So, hey, I'd like to move on. Like, you guys have all shown some really great successes, but how about some of the challenges that you've run into through this journey, and you know, around data, around collaboration, maybe around training? Paul, you want to start off since you still got the mic?
Oh, that's a tough one. Because, you know, we had a 35-year run with the mainframe mentality. And I'm even throwing the mid-tier in there, you know, like the Oracle stuff. You know, it was a great run. You know, people are still using it. It still works. But, man, the cloud is offering a lot more at a lot reduced price. But it's not just the cost. It's just the whole ability to think and transform, not just analytics. I'm even throwing, I have a pretty strong background in operations. You know, we have payroll, personnel, accounting. Those are some systems, marketplace. So I know what it's like to build an operational system too. And I think that the line between operations, I'm not necessarily talking transactions, but the line between operations and analytics can easily blur. You know, if I've got the operational team laying their data in some order of operation and it's out there in an open format, why can't I also have analytics sit on top of that? Now that's something we know we can do, but how do you have that conversation with your business leaders or even your IT leaders that have all come from this mainframe concept? Again, it worked really well for 35 years. I mean, CMS does a really good job of managing its data for the program. But we're now sort of in this point where, you know, the Texas power grid worked great until it didn't. Yeah. State unemployment systems worked great until they didn't. And so you don't know what's coming next. You know, as a nation, I think we've all got to shrink that security perimeter a little bit by bringing data copies into maybe a more unified environment. So I guess the challenge is it's not just CMS. It's like, I think it's going to take an entire generation to figure this out, but how do you move on? I mean, so yeah, I used to have a phone I picked up and I dialed the rotary dial. Then the flip phone came out, you know, then, you know, BlackBerry. And now I have an iPhone 11, you know, and I'm soon going to get something on my wrist. But how does an organization make that turn? And that's where I'm coming back to the ThoughtWorks data mesh by Zhamak Dehghani. That's because I think you've got to figure out how to organize both operations and analytics. But so I think that's a culture. I think that the challenge is by far cultural, and I don't mean that in a derogatory way because we're coming from a really strong position. But yet there's a new generation that's got to take ownership of this and take it to a different level because we don't need to hoard the data like we do today. How do you organize yourself? And I think technology is the least of it, but it also is the enabler. So I guess that's, boy, if you could, you're the smarty pants consultant. You tell me how to do it, Howard.
You talk about hoarding data. I was just reading an article this morning about, you know, people talk about data as currency. And I'll give you my data, but what are you going to give me in return? And data, we talk about democratizing data, but when people treat it as currency, there's no way to democratize it. And people think they own the data. The DoD, again, in this report that I was just reading today, said, hey, the data is not your data. The data is the DoD's data. You don't get to decide. And I think that's probably true at CMS and everywhere else in the.
Hey, let me throw another shout out there to the Department of Defense. They put together a really nice set of principles that I was able to look at. They're real good. Now we're working, tweaking those ourselves within CMS to make it a little bit more CMS centric. But they had a principle in there called Share First Ethos. Go from an organization that hoarded data, again, I think partly in light of the mainframe limitations, but how do you actually share that data? And I just think tools like Spark, that's part of the answer. But yeah, I did want to give a shout out there. Department of Defense has done some real nice work in this area.
Yeah. Hey, yeah. Dave, you must have some points on this.
Yeah. So, Paul, you mentioned how we organize ourselves. I was thinking about how, where do you put analytics from a large organization's perspective? Do you put it in the business lines? Do you put it in IT? Do you put it separate from both of those? And I think all three are the answer. You need to have it in IT and monitoring IT's analytics so that you could perform well. But you also need it in the business lines, like we have in BHA with informatics, the clinicians working the analytics. But and we have it in a pseudo business line called finance, but it is a business line. But I think you also need it separate from all of those so you can look at the whole organization and serve like the secretary. So I think organizationally, figuring out how you centralize and decentralize analytics is a key element in this, especially for the sharing of data that you're talking about, these data silos. If you have that centralized control to make sure that the sharing is occurring, but also the decentralized capabilities serving their masters, I think it's an important way to go. But one of the challenges you mentioned was, capacity, that on-prem capacity. We have machine learning that used to take us 24 to 48 hours just to run this machine learning. And now that we've gone to this cloud environment where we have the Databricks churning that data, and we're able to get it down to 2 hours from 24 to 48, running these complex machine learning algorithms. So there's a lot of resolutions that can be happening with these tools. But one of the challenges for all of these tools is that there's so dang many of them. It's like walking into the ice cream store and you got too many choices. And adding to that, it's like they're continuously bringing out new ice cream choices. And, you got the choices for the cloud platform, you got the choices for the databases, you got the choices of data management, for the visualizations, and the whole DevOps pipeline. There's so many choices to work with, and they're all improving exponentially. The exponential innovation curve is making it difficult to architect well and stick to it, because the challenge of not sticking to it is a whole bunch of tech debt. Every time you modify and change to a different platform, it takes a long time to get that back up and running and operational. So those are some of the challenges we face.
We're a bunch of hamsters.
Yeah.
We talk a lot about the fact that people have, a separate set of tools for, data engineering and data transformation. Then they have a separate set of tools for data warehousing, and maybe another set of tools for machine learning. And if you've got real-time ingest, that's yet another set of tools. And, there's firewalls between each of those. So the whole collaborative capabilities that, you can have a single set of tools that run through all of those different personas and use cases can be very liberating.
Yeah.
And I know you guys use Databricks for ETL, for some data warehousing, as well as for the machine learning. So you get, a really clean path there.
Exactly.
Hey, Andrew, what about Hennepin County? What are some of the challenges that you guys have? And tell me how much of them are around skills?
Sure. Well, certainly that's one. I was going to echo what Paul and David said. Certainly, that's something I'd like to hear Paul's thoughts on. Actually, is sort of this evolution of, and David as well, this evolution of MPP services to sort of take on the functions of Spark is kind of throwing my work up in the air right now. So, in terms of what we're going to do and what we're going to use. So that's certainly a challenge. The silos as well. Paul mentioned that. People owning the data. Really, sort of. I think there's a lot of fear around that. For me, it's not been technological. It's been, well, we don't want to put the data over here where everyone can get it, because then the analysts are going to use it in things we don't know about. They're going to misinterpret it. They're going to misunderstand it. Then there's going to be all these problems. To me, I think that's sort of a poor way of thinking about it. Like, I think people need to make mistakes. They need to learn. That's how people learn. We need to have a lot less fear about that. And that sort of feeds into the skills problem too, where, if you hire people and then you lock them into just basically writing reports off of what views the DBA creates for you, they never really learn the data systems underneath. They don't really learn how to query them. They don't really learn, going back to my grad school background, sort of the data generating process underneath, how that works. And so they're not able to explore, ask better questions, generate better insights, things like that. So it's certainly hard yet to find people with the requisite skills, but I think we often shoot ourselves in the foot by sort of over governing the people we do have.
And Dave, go ahead. I'm sorry.
So when we have a data breach or something like that, it really increases the pucker factor. And so that ends up having almost sometimes a pendulum swing that goes too far with controls, and then you end up with having a difficult time getting access to data to do the right things. So I agree with you, Andrew. That's definitely something that we need to work on.
There's another idea here that came out of the Department of Defense. It's a principle called data fit for purpose. And what that gets to is that, I need to define the data via data dictionary, and maybe have a community in a catalog that talks about that. But really, if you can put the business rules, and we're blessed at the CMS to have a pretty robust enterprise architectural program. So I guess, Andrew, to your point though, some data really you can impel yourself with your own ignorance on data. And you do need to be careful about what data that you present to others to be consumed. The database keys might be squirrely. You need to write about that. But I guess the idea would be, if you could because we do have these robust data catalogs, and they're more than what you would think like a Dewey Decimal System in a library. These can be whole ecosystems in and of themselves, where you can put links to business process models that your enterprise architects. Let's say I have a data domain. I can model the major data aspects of business process aspects, order of operation, who's doing what, the citations to the requirements, et cetera. You could do the same thing for your data. Most data domains have more than one data system, so you can start to show in a systems interaction model how that data flows through the system. So I guess where I'm going, the data fit for purpose, if you're really smart about it and use these tools in a synergistic fashion, you can have a broader context for where this data came from, its creation story, the restrictions are about it, because at some point, you can impel yourself on your own ignorance, and there's got to be some sort of organizational response to controlling the access to that, while you're also balancing, hey, people need to, as you say, they need to learn and to grow and understand the data. So I think the challenge there is to engage a whole of sort of government kind of approach to bring more than one type of context to the data, but in a very wiki kind of easily understood linked way to give that data fit for purpose. Is this the data that I need to use? And if so, tell me everything there is about this data so that I can interpret it correctly. And I think that's one of the answers to that.
Hey, I'd like to move along a little bit and ask you, and Dave, maybe you could start off here with, you've talked a little bit about the role that Databricks is playing in your environment, but maybe you could tell us a little bit about how you're using Databricks today. And I guess I'll also ask, how important is openness to the VA and to the work that you're doing? And how important was the role of openness in Databricks in your selection process there? I probably threw a bunch of questions at you there, didn't I?
That's all right. So
take any one of them.
Well, I'll start with one that you didn't ask. It's a little less obvious, and that's the positive impact that Databricks had through the customer service. I mean, we were put together with a dynamic duel with both Databricks and Microsoft working together to make sure that pipeline is working well for us. And they consistently supported us on the Scrum calls. They were persistent to resolve issues, challenges. They made sure that we used configuration best practices, and they helped us enhance the overall performance. So that's one aspect that I want to, that was very helpful for us, because when you're starting and putting in that new technology into your environment, there's a lot of questions that you could really screw up and pay a lot of money for without knowing it. And having those resources on board to help us out was fantastic. But we already talked about the performance issues from 5 days to a couple hours. I talked about the size, 10 billion rows of data in the FMS database when we're talking about 8 years of data. And before on-prem, we only could do 2 years of data because we just didn't have that capability. And putting this in was allowing us to, enhance the user experience by having much more research capability into that 8 years of data versus just 2. And so, there's also this other aspect that really has made a big difference, and that is when we were on-prem, there's a number of tools that we're coding in, a number of areas and we're having to chunk up this data, so we have complexity in the code and everything. And then once we've moved into the Databricks environment, our data science was able to just really reduce the complexity of the code, work in one environment, and really make that ETL much more smooth and efficient. So that also helps us in a huge way, and that's maintenance. We don't have somebody have to scroll through there and figure out what's going on with thousands of lines of code. Now we've got some efficient code that it's very easy for other people to come alongside and understand what's going on. So it's benefited us in a lot of ways, as far as like the performance, the folks that's come alongside of us, and also the complexity. So.
Well, definitely appreciate that feedback. And I know some of the people that have worked with the VA directly from Microsoft and from obviously the Databricks team, and they're top notch. So glad you appreciate that. Hey, Andrew, tell us a little bit. I know you shared a little bit about the fact that, Python and R came plugged in. What are there other aspects of, Databricks in your environment that have benefited Hennepin County?
Oh, yeah. Well, I mean, certainly the automation has been very helpful for us. And I just think some of the things we're talking about here about just being able to start to use lake architectures, which are still relatively new at, to sort of open things up so that people can sort of get in there and see what's going on in the data. And Databricks makes that pretty simple to do, particularly if you work with the Hive tables. It's very nice. You can sort of get a big structure going. It's almost like a database, yet, maybe for whatever reason, is governed a little differently. And so people can get in there and see, and if you know a little R, a little Python, even just a little SQL, you can start to examine what's going on with that data in your lake and start to learn new systems, which has been really great. So.
And Andrew, are you guys using kind of the lakehouse construct, which allows you to put the data in the data lake and then bring your SQL BI tools directly to it?
Yes, that's what I'm pursuing with the public safety data lake, which is sort of our biggest data lake project going right now. Yeah, I would like to keep stuff in Hive as much as possible. Certainly it's interesting, there's sort of increased pressure to move that along to a database, to a regular database. And I'm resisting it, but we'll see how successful I am. Just because this gets back to what we were talking about earlier with governance. I'm sort of afraid that as we move to a database, or as MPP starts to mimic those Spark functions, and it maybe starts to take over some of the lake processes, that we just get the same old governance structure applied to that again. And then I think people are limited again. And I really don't want that. So yeah, so we're using that. We're using Delta Lake. And it works pretty well, I would say, so far. I'm certainly looking forward to Photon and SQL Analytics. I think that'll up our game another notch. So.
Yeah, I think so too. And just going back to this DoD thing again, the DoD specifically said in a memorandum that they want to store data in a manner that is platform and environment agnostic, uncoupled from hardware and software dependencies. That's kind of the vision of Lakehouse. Once you put it into an MPP, you're probably putting it into their proprietary format. Does that weigh in your opinions?
Yeah, if you're asking me, yes.
Yeah.
To the extent I have a say, I'm the data scientist, so I don't get to make the architecture decisions. So yeah, I worked with Microsoft's tool recently, just sort of trying it out, and it's in preview still, so they're still adding functionality to it. But just some of the capabilities Databricks gives you in working with Delta are certainly at this point, far superior and much easier to use.
Any that stand out for you, Andrew?
Yeah. Well, let me think of how to put this. Well, it just wasn't possible to read the Delta files natively in the way that Databricks does. It wasn't possible to work with the log data. So you have to set up a workaround. And I don't know if that'll be fixed in the future, but I thought that was pretty limiting. So.
Hey, Paul, what about you? What's the role Databricks has played at CMS? I know we're involved in, 7 or 8 different programs up there. Any that you're directly involved in?
Well, yeah, I've seen a bunch of them come on board. You got the work that started in the Medicaid area with some very pioneering work in the sense that, brought a new tool. It's a new class of tool. Databricks is just a new class of tool. But the thing I'm keeping an eye on now is, it's still not in production yet, but the fraud prevention system, our Center for Program Integrity is doing some really, really great work, sort of taking the initiative on a lot of the machine learning. So I think, and artificial intelligence. So they're sort of in a way, they're trying to move as much of these new technologies up as far in the life cycle as you can. And then, of course, you have activity that's going as data is in flight. You could interrogate it there. And then once it's sitting in a big pool of data for a very long time, you can do some more, different types of deep learning. So I think all of those are happening at CMS. And so it's very exciting. I do think the open, isn't that different too, right? Isn't the whole open source started with the coding frontier and the whole agile movement. And I think, so look at what happened. You had the hardware folks did their thing, and then the software folks. And I think the data people are just bringing it to that third wave of change. And how does all that come together? I still think we're sorting it out, but I really just, the notion that not only is there open source code for data tools like Spark, and that you guys donated Delta Lake to that, which is a very cool thing, but then the open standard itself, like a Parquet, it just opens up a lot, and I think that's hugely important to CMS. I think it's a discriminating factor, actually. It's a very big deal because it allows us to, if we want to pick up shop and go to the next cloud that has a better offering or a more secure offering, we'll be able to do that. And I think that's, you're always going to be locked into a certain degree, but I think this whole movement of the open movement is a very big deal. And see where
Paul,
that
have
takes us.
you taken a look at any of these lakehouse architectures that Databricks and others are promoting?
I haven't in about a year. So I've been going head down trying to get some data strategy work, but I do. David was talking about the pace of change. I had the privilege of helping to organize our first data summit several years ago. And we brought a bunch of technical folks together, and we did it out of necessity because we were just getting into it. you spend your whole career learning about DB2 or Oracle, and you're, fat, dumb, and happy. And then the next thing you know, a bucket of cold water gets thrown on you, and you got to understand, like, what's S3? And the list never stops. And as David said, it's accelerating. So that makes it quite a challenge to stay up, with what's going on. But yeah, it's interesting where this is going, and I think we are hamsters on the cage, David. I hate to tell you, I think we're on this journey, and it's not gonna ease up. So.
Well, that's a great segue into my final question for the day. And that's kind of, where do you go now in your analytics journey? And, what's next on the table for CMS, Paul?
Wow. Well, I think there's just a lot of, again, I've been at it for 22 years at CMS. I've never been more positive on where the future can go. There's so much innovation that's taking place. And I think there is a recognition that we've got to sort of have some governance. We're not quite sure what that is. I think the whole industry is, it's a lot easier to talk about code and business requirements. Data has its own world, and you have to sort of learn it. And so I think data governance is going to be a big deal. I think new architectures like data mesh is a big idea. Out of the Degani's papers are good. And then I throw a challenge out to folks. So, and Howard, you turned me on to this a few weeks ago. So, okay, so now there's this new thing called feature stores. And I spent some time, and the good thing about the internet is you can go, I went and looked at some of the past Spark Summits. There's some fantastic stuff out on the web that gets you up to speed fairly quick. But, if we don't watch it, if we don't get pre-organized, like, we know that in a couple of days, all these cicadas are going to come out of the ground, right? And we can sit there and watch all this come out. But how do you, there's this guy that's put together a tracking mechanism for us to become like scientists to help him figure out where all this brood X is going to come. So if there's we get tens of thousands of people taking pictures of the bugs, we can then collectively get a better sense of where we're going. So I worry the same thing for like machine learning. And wouldn't it be nice if we had the foresight to organize ourselves more now, to get this metadata under control for the things that we already have, and then keep an eye on what's coming next as we get these big libraries of machine learning. These tools are coming. They're going to have their own sort of metadata that has to be integrated with this bigger picture. So I guess that's what's coming next. And I think the next generation, I think we've made it through the cloud. We made it through the hardware. We made it through the tools like Spark. I think the next challenge is metadata management and knowledge management, and bringing all this together so that people can find what they're looking for more quickly. They have trust in it when they get there. And then we let a next generation of people coming through innovate. I think that's, but to do that, we should be laying down more organized, just get ourselves a little bit more organized from a governance. And I think it comes back to metadata.
I think you're right, Paul. It's the next frontier, not just the metadata, but the governance of the data. I think all of that's, connected together, and it's still a challenge. Hey, Dave.
And you're not going to talk about the cicadas, though?
I'm still waiting. They keep saying the cicadas are coming any day, but I still haven't seen them.
All right.
What's a cicada? No, I'm just kidding.
So similar to how you talk about crowdsourcing the cicada pictures, I think that one of the ways that we want to move forward is like with hackathons, because now you bring in a bunch of different folks that are doing it differently in multiple locations together to learn together, to grow together, to understand what's going on elsewhere, start learning about other tools that might be doing well for other folks. And so that's one of the things that VA is working on, is putting together some hackathons, and we're even wanting to host that, to bring together a bunch of folks to take use cases and explore them with the big data that we have available, from the FMS data to other types of data that we have available. And even Databricks is helping us out with this one to to work that hackathon together. But we want to start. That's that way of getting that knowledge management kind of centralized and working together, but decentralized. And so I'd also say that it's not just that collaboration, but one of the things that we want to do is make sure that we, Paul, you talked about architecting and being able to move and being, so you have a conflict between being able to quickly change cloud platforms or whatever and the tech debt that increases. So as new technology comes along, reduces that tech debt so you can be more versatile. I think we need to be careful though on how quickly you move. You need to be somewhat decisive and yet being able to move, so there's some deep challenges to those decisions that you make early on what architecture you're using. And that's what I like about Databricks is it's one of those that you can move with. So yeah, that open source type of concepts is going to be very important in the future.
Yeah, and thank you, Dave. And Andrew, what's next for Hennepin County?
Yeah, so I think the next big step for us is, we're still finishing this public safety data lake project, and now we're talking about scaling it. So can we do something like this enterprise-wide, where we get all of the departments and lines of business together to create sort of a single source, where we can hopefully develop a single identifier, so we could see things like, if somebody was in the jail, were they also on, food stamp service, SNAP service, where else have we been touching these residents in our system, and can we use that to our advantage to help them out? So doing that, figuring out the platform for doing that is certainly the next step. After that, I think maybe this will go along with it, is I think doing more with our unstructured data. So everything's so much about relational data. What are we going to do with it? Where are we going to put it? How are we going to provision access? But there's so much unstructured data and so much more coming in day by day. Just in public safety, where body cams were added in the last couple of years, there's transcriptions of so much. I mean, now we're auto transcribing certain things. We just have lots and lots of digital data that we're just not doing much with other than storing. And certainly there's a lot to explore there. So
yeah, that's a threshold for everybody to overcome. And many organizations are doing much more with that today, but it's still definitely a challenge. And
sure.
Yeah. Hey, let me ask one final question. What lessons have you learned? Andrew, can you share any lessons learned at Hennepin County? Something that somebody could leave here and say, oh boy, I'm not going to make that error, or I know the path forward based on what Andrew had to experience?
Learn from me.
Well, you've been down the path a little bit, so you might have some experiences.
Yeah, that's a good question. I think,
You want me to come back to you?
Yeah, maybe circle back in a second. Yeah, let's think about that.
Okay, Dave, you got an answer for that one?
Sure. I think for me, personally, learning that really you need to go back to the business and understand what their outcomes are going to be needed. We can easily get into some data science and go, oh, I've got an idea, and we can go all over the place on crunching data and coming with answers. But what is the outcome that the business actually needs? And we need to keep going back to that and deeply understanding that to provide them good products that will support their needs. And also, a lot of times the business doesn't know what they need, what can be done. Yeah. And so providing them concepts and capabilities that can actually accomplish. Like, I think, Paul, you were talking maybe about incorporating the analytics in the software systems so that the software system doesn't need the human to engage in certain decisions. If we have good analytics in certain decision points. So even knowing that can be done is a big benefit to the customer, but a lot of times they don't think about that. So getting into the customer and the business's business is going to really help us come up with useful products.
Yeah, what's the art of the possible and making sure that it's aligned with the business value. I think
Right.
those are great points. I don't know if, Paul, you can add anything to that. That kind of summarizes a lot for me.
Yeah, it did for me too. I think that's the trick. IT can be an enabler, but you've got to just be patient with each other. The business and IT have to be patient, but they have to talk, and they have to keep working through ideas because there's a change afoot. But I agree, the business is that's the key. It's really the key to solving all this, being with the business. But also, as you're saying, David, letting them know what's possible. It's sort of two hands on the steering wheel.
Yeah.
Andrew, right back to you for final comment.
Yeah. I guess when I think about some of the challenges in building out something like a lake architecture in your organization, it's how much relationships matter. At least I think it's sort of probably different in private sector, where my friends tell me you kind of just have to convince the CIO or the CDO that you want to do something, and if they buy in, then you're good. That's the way it feels talking to them. But in our organization, the structure is just a lot more flat, and so you can't really just convince somebody who's in administration and then everybody buys in and they do it. No, you have to leverage those relationships. You have to have those relationships to convince people and to build trust that, okay, we're going to do this, and I'm not going to cut you out. I'm not going to take over your work. You're going to be a part of this. You can use it and leverage it to do better work. And sort of going along that journey at the pace that the people around you will let you go, I think is important.
I love that. And I always tell people we're all in sales. We're all selling an idea and trying to get people to go along with us. So I think that's great. Hey, I want to conclude the panel today. I think there were some really insightful comments from all of our panelists. David, Andrew, Paul, I want to thank you guys for your partnership, for your support, and for participating in this broadcast today. And thank you for your, using Databricks. So
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
What a great discussion. So many best practices and lessons learned. Thank you to our amazing group of panelists, and thank you all for tuning in. Please make sure to stop by the Solution Theater later today for interactive demos on the most popular data and machine learning use cases across industry. Enjoy the rest of the summit, everyone.